thank you very much. And can we just check the time we've got? We've got, okay, 23 minutes. So thank you very much. So my name's Ewan Ballantyne, and I'm delighted to welcome Kate Fitzgerald as the Head of Policy at the PSR for this session. Now, the brief is the future of non-sweeping VRPs and how do we unlock their full potential. So just before I start, I just mentioned it was meant to be a panel session with Andy Saker. Unfortunately, he was taken ill this morning, and hence we are. So 2 seconds. I'm not sure if people can hear, if they're listening or not. Can I just check if people can hear us? They can, yes, good. All that chatting, and here's, I won't take it personally, it's okay. So rather than a panel, it's a fireside chat, but without a fire, as things are. We'll try and make sure there's 5 minutes for Q&A, because this is always quite a key topic. And I'm conscious that in the previous sessions, there has been quite a lot said about VRPs and about some of the key topics. I'm sure we'll revisit some of those topics, but Kate has a key role at the centre of the industry in helping the industry, and obviously from a regulatory policy perspective, make those things happen. So I think that's right that we do that. So moving on to the first question. And so Kate, it would be great if you could just tell us a little bit to the audience about the opportunities that VRPs, because we're focused on VRPs in this session, will unlock from your perspective and the problems that you believe they will solve.
Fabulous, thank you, Ewan, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be given a platform to talk about one of my favourite subjects this afternoon. So, just to quickly introduce myself, if I may. So I head up the policy team at the PSR, and at the PSR we're only really interested in three things. We're interested in competition, innovation, and end user outcomes. So we're an economic regulator, and we think very hard about where and how we intervene and driving the right incentives in the industry to do what it needs to do. And open banking is an absolutely critical area to us. And the reason that open banking is critical to us in the PSR is because we think it drives greater competition. And we think greater competition, and by that I mean greater competition between payment systems, we think it can drive much, much better outcomes for users. So not competition for the sake of competition, competition to make sure that things like value, quality, price, all of those good things can come out of better competition between payment systems. So that might give you a clue as to why I'm very interested in non-sweeping VRPs and indeed how we unlock their potential. In terms of, Ewan, sorry, your initial question, which was about what do they actually bring.
Yeah, particularly around the opportunities that VRPs will help unlock and the problems they solve. Yeah.
So I mean, the first problem I think that they could help us to solve is that first step towards better competition, right? Yeah. I think already what we see in some of the use cases, and that, there was a fantastic panel here earlier talking about some of those really strong use cases, is what we see in those from a user perspective, it really stands out in terms of their flexibility and their control. So some of those features that you see in a VRP that you just don't see in a direct debit, right? So enabling people to pay what they can pay when they can pay it, so those kinds of use cases, giving flexibility and control to users, I think is giving instant value to businesses who are taking payment. All of these things are absolutely what sets VRPs apart in terms of the things that we would like to see in the market.
Yeah, no, thank you. And the to some degree, they're about creating choice for retailers and an alternative to cards.
They are.
But of course, cards work pretty well. So do consumers and businesses really need a different payment mechanism?
That's such a good question. So do consumers and businesses really need an alternative? Well, we think there needs to be an alternative, right? And I'll come to the different perspectives of consumers and businesses in just a second. But when we look around the globe at other jurisdictions, what we see really clearly is that the majority of other countries have a third option. They have a different way of making payments that isn't Visa and isn't MasterCard. And in that respect, in many respects the UK is ahead. In that particular respect, actually we don't have in this country an alternative to Visa and MasterCard when we are making retail payments. So, we really see that having that competition for those retail payments in the UK on a domestic rail could be incredibly helpful for both businesses and consumers. So I will start with consumers because it's difficult. People quite often say to me, cards work brilliantly, and they do, right? Cards, they protect you, they're free at the point of use. If you're a consumer, they're super easy, they interact with your wallet, and what's not to like, right? They are super fast and super convenient. And all of those things are absolutely brilliant. From a merchant perspective, though, they're quite expensive. They are quite expensive to use, and they are also not giving you real-time value in most cases. You normally have to wait a little while for your money. And so that's just two places where actually we think more competition could actually help to improve some of those types of outcomes.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kate. And I just want to move to, at the end of the JROC, and really some fantastic collaboration and industry engagement last year, and the end of the process. It's kind of an outline of steps towards phase 1 going live in October 2024. So how's October 2024 shaping up?
It's coming fast, isn't it? You should know that from a Pay UK perspective.
That's right. I'm kind of intrinsically involved in that as well. That's right.
Yes. So we have, as you'll know, we've just consulted on some particular aspects of VRPs where we really wanted industry input into where we go with the next steps. But we've not wasted time, right? So while we were doing that, there were some things which we already knew through our engagement, through the VRP working group in particular, which ran from the summer to the end of last year. We already knew there were some things that were, frankly, no-brainers. There were things that industry said they wanted. There were things that people said they needed. And so with those things, and again, the panel before us has really set the scene well for us here. So those things are around some of the functionality you need to make VRPs work, and also some of the things you need to enable you to know what to do when something goes wrong. So I'm going to call it dispute processing. It's really how you affect, when there's a problem, when the payment's gone wrong, who talks to who and how do you talk to one another. So we have asked Pay UK and OBL to come together to start work on those things which are absolutely at the heart of any proposition that can go to market. And we see, the beginnings of a really positive, industry-driven conversation to solve for those things, where actually we suspect you might not need regulatory intervention, right? You might not need anybody to step into that space, because if the industry can do that themselves, then fantastic. You're going to have a solution that works well for the market. There were a couple of things where actually from our conversations, and again, particularly through the VRP working group, we couldn't see that industry could solve them. And those are two things which are slightly more difficult to solve because they involve quite important trade-offs. And those things are the commercial model and mandation in particular. So what we saw through our conversations with retailers, with banks, ASPSPs, through with PISPs, through many other parties, what we saw is there were really conflicting incentives, right? So really different drivers from what people wanted from a commercial model. I mean, and that's pretty obvious,
Yeah.
right? If you're a bank, you want to make money out of payments, or if you're a PISP, you want to be able to develop really good products and make money out of your customer relationships. And if you're a retailer, you want the cheapest possible product you could ever get, but at really high quality, right? So these are all really important trade-offs. And we couldn't see, looking at that, how industry was ever going to come together and say, yes, this is the right commercial model, which is why we have consulted on a start of a 10 for the commercial model. And we've done that for a subset of VRP use cases, and those are more, what we're calling the more simple, so the lower risk VRP use cases. So in terms of that progress, what do we see? We see industry cracking on and getting on with a really active conversation, which I'm sure you're involved in, Ewan, which is fantastic. And then we see us kind of really doing, what is the work of a regulator, which is really considering incentives, looking at all the sides, and how you solve for some of the more thorny problems.
Yeah.
Are we going to have a live product in October? I think watch this space. We're going to work really hard to do what we can as soon as we can. It will largely, we've already had a huge amount of response to our consultation, and that response is hugely varied. We've got very broad support for getting the product to market, but we've got different views, and we're working our way through those different views. We would like to come back around about the middle of this year and outline next steps. I know that Pay UK and OBL are also working hard on what that looks like from their perspective. So I think, we will keep you posted on how we're tracking through a lot of complicated things that need to come together.
Indeed, and the message is for the economic model aside, for the industry to get on with the rest of it to some degree, isn't it? Yeah, there's a challenge to all of us collectively in this.
It is a challenge, and do you know what? We've had, as I said, we've got really good support, and we've heard that through our consultation. So for anybody who's working for business who gave us input to that, thank you for that, because that is hugely appreciated. We know that there is a need for these products. We know people want them, and we know industry want to get on with them. We know that also there are some sticky issues, right? And we saw some players didn't like the commercial model that we proposed, and some players proposed different things, but there isn't majorities here. This isn't easy to pick winners and losers. So, we've really got to go to quite an adult conversation about how we play off those trade-offs. But that shouldn't stop progress, right? And I do hear some people say, oh, we're waiting for the regulator to sort out the commercial model until we can, crack on with some of the... But I guess I would say, why waste time? Why would we sit and wait? Because actually, we all know that this needs to happen, and better to give ourselves time to engage properly with some of those, implementation and dispute resolution questions, get the best solutions we can, and then we will make sure that we come to the party as soon as we can with the answers to some of those tricky questions.
No, it's a good challenge. Back to the industry, I imagine if I was thinking of what some other organisations would say is like, yes, it's all well and good that the rest of us can continue with the non-economic model pieces, but without that business case and without that question at the heart of it, where's the case for investment in all the other elements? So there's, not saying there's an answer to it right now, but you can see how it is hard to look at one thing in isolation.
It definitely is.
So, but will there be, therefore, at some point, a decision will be made on either some kind of compromise arrangement or one end of the spectrum or another at some point, we think, in advance of October?
So what I'm expecting to happen is that around about the middle of the year, we will come back out and communicate what we found from our consultation and outline next steps. So you'll definitely hear from us on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. And then just the other big topic, of course, consumer protection, which we touched on briefly.
Yes.
And one of my observations is actually that in all the other elements of making VRPs a reality and unlocking full potential, kind of economic model and consumer protection have a habit of overwhelming the debate. It's very hard to go on with other things because these two are so much at the heart of it. But I guess with protection, is consumer protection needed? Is it needed now, in the future? Is it built up in phases? Does it exist already? Interested in your take on that.
Yeah, and I think it is really important. So, I think the first thing we'll say is that it is not an accident that for this first phase of VRP, what we are what the VRP working group has come to recommend is that we focus on some of those lower risk use cases.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely linked to the points that you're making, Ewan, about consumer protection. So we think if we can get, if industry can get a product to market which has already got sectoral protection in place, then some of the things that you need from a payment system for some of those more complex, higher risk use cases don't necessarily need to be in place from the outset. So let me try and explain what I mean by that. So if you're paying a financial services firm, which is regulated by the FCA, if you're paying the government or local government, if you're paying a utility, a regulated utility, then actually we would expect those behaviours, because those businesses, because they're in regulated sectors, to behave in a way which actually means that people aren't going to lose money through transacting with them, right? And so we think for that reason they're lower risk, and actually because there are protections in place in those sectors already, then the onus on having, quite well-developed protection in the payment system is less, right? Now this is still a question that we need to work through, and industry needs to understand this. But certainly in terms of going to that kind of where we might need protection less, that's where we're heading first. Now that doesn't mean that we don't have the appetite to do the harder thing, which is something with that more protection, that is going to perhaps need some of those kinds of protections that you see. So we see that as a really important next step. The first step, though, is that you do need to be able to sort something out when there is something has gone wrong. So we need the parties in the payments chain to be able to talk to one another. And so when we talk about disputes, we really mean a way to communicate. That's what we're after in the first place. Because we don't think we need massively enhanced protection in the payment scheme itself.
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you. And is your mic okay?
Is it
it was coming and going there, but hopefully here. I think actually you're back now, I think.
Am I better to use this one? Okay.
I can hear you. Can hear you now. I think it's back. Yeah, maybe.
Right.
Don't move in your seat in case that upsets the cables. But it sounds like disputes process aside, which I completely agree with, on the broader consumer protection. But to some degree, the message is that we'll get to that in due course. Actually, for phase one, that's not a showstopper. We should work on it towards the future, but we shouldn't let that get in the way of October, for example.
Absolutely not. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Absolutely not. So absolutely not. So we think there's already a set of use cases where non-sweeping VRP can come into its own and be used, ahead of us solving some of those more thorny problems, which we do need to get to. We definitely need to get to, but we need to get them to them for the more complex retail type cases behind them.
And any other key themes in the call for views that are worth calling out for the audience of the areas that the PSR are pondering, investigating, or considering?
Well, in terms of what we're calling for, or we have called for views on, it's around what's the right commercial model. So is that a cost recovery model? What are the relevant costs? How does that work? And what we've actually done is consulted on a model where we think competition can still exist in the market, and there are great opportunities for competition to exist in the market. We're also consulting on whether we should, as a regulator, mandate certain firms to participate, and that will be really important, right? Because this is two-sided platform stuff. You need mass adoption. Again, as the panel ahead of us, was talking about, this doesn't really work if you've only got one bank and one PISP doing it, because your chances of getting a successful payment in that environment are pretty low. So do we need to mandate? Do we need to make sure that there is sufficient adoption for this payment method to be you know, pretty much ubiquitous from the outset. So these are all really important questions.
Yeah, no, perfect. No, thanks, Kate. And interesting, we focused a lot on the immediate future for VRPs rather than the longer term, which was one of the things we're hoping to do. But of course, we've only got 3.5 minutes left, and keen to have some questions or the opportunity for questions. So I've just, if I could look to the audience, hands up for anyone who would like to ask a question of Kate. And we have chap with the microphone there. Could have your name and organisation and then your question.
Yeah, sure. Alejandro from Lloyds Bank. Kate, drawing back to your comment around you saw some areas where the industry perhaps was struggling a bit coming together, and hence your consultation on those low-risk use cases on things like commercial model, the mandatory aspect. How likely do you see that for the more complex use cases, which, as the name says, they're more complex, that the industry can come together, or do you think it's likely that the PSR would eventually need to emit a view on such things, similarly to what you've done on the existing consultation ones?
Thanks, Alejandro. That is a really good question. I think what we've been really clear on in this consultation is that we're consulting on a very specific commercial model for this specific set of use cases, and that we then will need to come back to those more complex cases. I guess to give you my perception, personally, having chaired that VRP working group for several months, is we're going to have a lot of different incentives from different players, even when we get to the retail use cases. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have similar difficulties. Now, whether that means we propose to solve it in the same way or in a different way, with a similar commercial model or a very different commercial model, or whether we think about the cost model differently, or, you know, all of those things are absolutely kind of where we need to turn our minds to next. But in answer to your kind of first question, my instinct tells me that there's still going to be different incentives. So it's probably going to be somewhere where the PSR needs to focus.
Yeah, a great question. Thank you. And anyone else in the audience? Hard to see with the lights. I think that's a no. Anyone, put your hand up if there is anything. But just then, in the last minute, the longer term for VRPs, and I suppose, you know, pay by bank or giving choice for retailers and merchants, what comes next after, once we're live, we're out running, what comes after that?
What after the...
after the VRP phase one. So both what would good look like for VRPs, and also, I suppose, you know, what I call it, pay by bank, back to the point of do we need an acceptance mark? What do we call it? And what do we call the single and the repeating or recurring version? So what would come next, do you think, after this current challenge is overcome?
So, you know, when we convened that VRP working group, there was clearly an appetite from retailers and from all over the payments industry to go to the next step on e-commerce and even point of sale, physical transactions. We know the appetite is there. I think some of the things we need to think through are around how fast we can get there, and, you know, how many different types of use case there are. I think we're already sort of starting to establish the beginnings of a principle, which is you can have different protection and different commercial models for different types of payment. Now, is it true then that the next stage is just one more product which works for everything in retail, or are there a number of different stages to that, and a number of different commercial models and a number of different protections? And we haven't got into that yet. I mean, what good looks like, just to kind of really paint that picture, is that we have got a third domestic scheme which you can use, which consumers trust, which businesses want to adopt, which competes, which is innovative, which drives down prices for retailers, for businesses, and which, you know, has exceptional consumer outcomes for UK domestic payments. That's where we'd like to get to. How far and quickly we can get there, I think is still up for grabs. Yeah.
I don't think a very worthy aim. I'm sure we'd all like to see that too. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and just put your hands together for Kate. Say thank you for the time and for your participation as well. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think I've now got used to what a silent seminar is, so I now know that for the future as well. Thank you, everyone.